It's 2 in the morning. The airport terminal is nearly empty. A few cleaners, a gate agent staring at a screen. You'd think this is the time the runway is quiet, right? It isn't. Outside, one after another, massive jets are pushing back from their gate. Rolling, take off. No passengers, no announcements, just heavy machines disappearing into the dark at a rhythm that feels almost industrial. Your first instinct makes complete sense. Cheaper landing slots, quieter skies, less traffic. That's why cargo planes fly at night, right? Except that's the least interesting reason, and it misses the thing that actually forces the schedule. Because those planes don't just prefer the night. In a specific, physical, legally binding way, they need it. Here's what's actually happening. Air has weight. Not much, you can't feel it standing still, but for a jet engine running at full thrust and a wing generating lift at takeoff speed, it is everything. The density of the air determines how much lift a wing generates at a given speed and how much thrust an engine can actually produce. And air density changes with temperature. Cold air is dense, packed tightly with molecules. Hot air is thin, spread out. A wing moving through hot afternoon air has fewer molecules to push against. An engine gulping that same hot air has fewer molecules to combust. So on a hot day, a plane doesn't just struggle with lift, it struggles with thrust at exactly the same moment. That is a double penalty, 2 systems degraded simultaneously at the one moment in the flight when you need both performing at their peak, the takeoff roll. For a passenger jet flying at 60 or 70% of its structural maximum weight, the margins are wide enough that this is a manageable inconvenience. For a fully loaded freighter pressing near its structural maximum, it is not. Here is the part most people miss. Cargo aircraft are not just heavier in absolute terms, they are operated to a fundamentally different standard. A passenger jet has empty seats, light luggage, and comfortable performance buffers built into every calculation by design. A freighter at maximum gross weight has almost none of that buffer. The entire business model of air freight is to maximize payload per flight, which means cargo operators are constantly working at the edges of their performance envelopes in ways that passenger carriers almost never approach. Every extra kilogram on board is revenue. Every percentage point of unused capacity is loss. So when conditions degrade, when the afternoon heat thins the air, cargo operations feel it harder, faster, and with significantly less room to absorb it than any passenger flight at the same airport, on the same runway, in the same conditions. Pilots and dispatchers work from a concept called density altitude, the altitude the aircraft's performance effectively thinks it's at, based on actual temperature and pressure rather than where the plane physically sits. On a hot afternoon at a sea-level airport, a plane can be sitting at 0 feet and performing as though it is at 4,000. That changes everything. How much runway the takeoff consumes, how quickly the aircraft accelerates, how steeply it climbs, and how much distance it covers before having to clear the terrain at the far end of the field. At peak summer temperatures in Phoenix, Dubai, or Delhi, or at any airport combining heat with elevation, fully loaded cargo jets sometimes cannot legally depart at maximum weight during the afternoon. Not because the airline prefers to wait, because the performance charts say no. So the flight holds for cooler air, or freight gets offloaded to make the weight legal, or the route adds an en route fuel stop so the departure can be lighter. Night is not a scheduling preference. It is a physical calculation. And here's where this stops being about one aircraft on one runway. The major cargo hubs, Memphis, Louisville, Leipzig, Dubai, are architecturally organized around this thermal window. The sorting floors, the loading crews, the ramp schedules, the feeder flights arriving from smaller cities, all of it is timed backward from the coolest viable departure window, which runs roughly from 11 at night through 5 in the morning. The Amazon package on your doorstep this morning moved through a system calibrated, at its structural core, around AIR temperature. So did the pharmaceutical shipment, on a temperature-controlled pallet, the auto parts on a just-in-time manufacturing schedule, the overnight documents. None of it is communicated to the person receiving it. It simply works, invisibly, because decades of air cargo logistics have shaped themselves around a physical fact about the atmosphere. The schedule was not designed by a single mind. It evolved under continuous pressure from physics. Now, here's the part that genuinely seems wrong until you think it through. Freight dispatchers at hot, high-altitude airports will deliberately send a plane out underloaded, intentionally leave revenue cargo sitting on the ramp so the flight can depart legally within a specific thermal window. A half-empty freighter that gets airborne makes money. A full freighter sitting for 6 hours, waiting for the air to cool, does not. The logic is obvious once you see it, but intuition runs the other direction. Fill the plane, maximize the load. Experienced freight operators think in thermal windows and block times, not load percentages in isolation. And there is an even stranger version of this. Crews at certain airports sometimes request more fuel than the route strictly requires, knowingly adding weight to an aircraft already constrained by weight, because the center of gravity balance under a specific cargo configuration matters more than the marginal performance penalty from carrying additional fuel. Adding weight to solve a weight problem. That decision is made by trained professionals, and it is exactly correct. This wasn't always handled well. In the 1990s, the explosive growth of overnight express cargo pushed freight operators into progressively tighter performance envelopes. More volume, more routes, more aircraft running closer to their limits, more pressure on dispatch to get flights out on time. Performance calculations weren't always grounded in real-time conditions. Some operators applied standard planning figures that assumed acceptable conditions even when actual conditions were not. The incidents that followed weren't all dramatic headline crashes. They were runway excursions, rejected takeoffs that consumed nearly all available pavement, departures from hot, high-elevation airports that cleared terrain at the far end by margins that were technically legal and should not have been comfortable for anyone watching from the ground. Those incidents forced a regulatory reckoning. The FAA and ICAO tightened takeoff performance requirements significantly. Today, every departure at a serious cargo operation requires a real-time analysis. Actual temperature, actual humidity, actual wind, actual weight, actual runway state. Not yesterday's figures, not a planning estimate. The specific numbers right now for this departure. The schedule you watch at 2 in the morning at a cargo hub is partly a legacy of what happened when operators pushed too close to the edge in the heat of day. Here is what you have already seen and not fully read. When a heavy freighter rotates on a warm day and the nose lifts from the runway, the engines are running at near maximum continuous thrust, and they will stay there through the entire initial climb, far longer than a passenger jet during a normal departure. The faint vapor sometimes trailing the exhaust in warm, humid air isn't just combustion product. It's the engine sustaining a ceiling of output. The slow, deliberate climb angle isn't the plane struggling, it's the pilots flying precise, calculated numbers, because optimal climb speed at maximum weight is slower than what looks aggressive from the ground. You may have noticed cargo jets with visible wing flex even while taxiing slowly toward the runway. That deflection is the structure responding to load. Those wings are near their design limits before the plane even moves. And those slow, low running lights crossing the sky at 1 in the morning, lower for longer than any passenger flight, that is a freight network running its physics window. You were watching it the whole time, you just didn't have the key. There are real exceptions, and the full picture is messier than one clean rule. On transoceanic routes at cruise altitude, density altitude becomes essentially irrelevant. The air at 35,000 feet is cold and stable regardless of surface heat below. Polar routes in deep winter give cargo operators wide performance margins because the air is extraordinarily dense, but introduce new constraints. Ice accretion on control surfaces, cold soak effects on fuel and hydraulic systems, de-icing delays that consume ground time and compress the schedule. Some airports have nighttime noise curfews that directly conflict with the optimal thermal departure window, forcing operators into an uncomfortable choice between better physics and local regulation. The night schedule is dominant and real, but it bends under geography, season, aircraft type, and local rules in ways that never resolve into a single clean answer. But here is what all of it adds up to. That runway at 2 in the morning, those heavy jets rolling one after another into the dark, is not the absence of daytime activity. It is the world's supply chain running inside its optimal performance window. Those planes are not defaulting to night because it's convenient or cheap. They are targeting it because the physics point there. The schedule is not arbitrary. The air made it. The next time you see a heavy freighter pushing back at midnight, you are watching a machine that needs the cold the way a combustion engine needs oxygen, not as a preference, but as a condition. And there is one more layer. There is another category of aircraft that faces a more extreme version of this same problem, one with a much shorter runway, a much tighter margin for error, and a far longer documented history of getting the density-altitude calculation catastrophically wrong. It has crashed at airports you would recognize on days that looked perfectly flyable with experienced crews who never saw it coming. And it is not a freighter. It is a type of aircraft that most people assume is essentially immune to runway physics entirely. That story is darker, and the physics behind it are exactly what you now understand.